Hello horror hounds, and welcome back to the third instalment of my House franchise reviews from the Arrow video box set. In this review I'm going to be talking about House 3, the horror show. So this film was released in 1989 at the tail end of the slasher era, around the same time as Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Child, and Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. The reason I mention these two films in the same context is because this film diverts completely in a different direction from the previous House films. So it is in fact completely a slasher film. So it had a bit of a confusing background really in terms of its title. It was originally House 3, the horror show, but then they rebranded it in the US as just the horror show, but then over in the UK it was still part of the House franchise. It caused a bit of confusion for fans by the time the fourth instalment of the House franchise, which I'll be talking about in the next video, came out, because the fans were like, where did House 3 happen? Because they just knew this movie as the horror show. So it has the same production team behind it. Sean S. Cunningham produced the movie. Kane Hodder was stunt coordinator again. The music was composed by Harry Manfredini, who had composed the previous movies and the Friday the 13th franchise. The film encountered a bit of a turbulent production. The original director, David Blythe, was fired halfway through the movie, so he was replaced by James Isaac, who's best known for directing Jason X in 2001. So on the Arrow video box set you have two options in how to view the film. The first one is the uncut European version, or you can opt for the original US theatrical version. I personally went for the complete uncut version, as with any horror movie I don't really like the idea of cuts being made to it whatsoever, and I like to see it in all its gory glory, the full scale of things, so rather than seeing what was originally in theatres. Back in 1989 the film was potentially going to receive an X rating by the MPAA classification board, and in order to avoid this, that was the reason behind making cuts to the movie. There was like one scene where a body is discovered, cut in half, and they made cuts to that scene, for example, and so eventually it just got a straight up R rating. In the House Companion booklet written by Simon Barber, which I've spoken about in the previous videos, he discusses how Sean S. Cunningham has some regrets when it comes to how he marketed the franchise. He feels that because of the differing tones throughout each film, that they never really kind of stood on their own as a collective franchise. They never really made their mark in the same way that other film series had at the time. So the plot of the film centres on a police detective named Lucas McCarthy, played by cult actor Lance Henriksen. He's traumatised after witnessing a horrific crime scene which saw him bring the notorious serial killer Max Meat Cleaver Jenke to justice. So he basically put him away, and now Meat Cleaver Max is on death row. He is about to be electrocuted in full view of everybody. And leading up to this event, Lucas is having nightmares and is really freaked out by the whole thing. It's really, really traumatised him. His family, which consists of his wife and two teenage children, are deeply concerned for him, for his well-being. So to put everything to rest, he goes to watch the execution, and Meat Cleaver Max is ready to meet his maker. So Meat Cleaver Max is played by Brian James, and he is probably the best part of the entire movie. He's apparently even said that this is one of his favourite roles that he's ever portrayed. He has some absolutely great one-liners in it. So he's getting electrocuted, and something goes horrifically wrong. For some reason they can't bring this man down, and hilariously his reaction to being electrocuted goes, all that did was give me a hard-on. So that is kind of the tone that we're, you know, setting with the movie, that it is, again, very, very funny, just like the previous instalments. It doesn't take itself too seriously at all. So, of course, as I previously stated, the electrocution goes completely wrong, and Meat Cleaver Max's spirit is out to get Lucas and those closest to him. I am a huge fan of the slasher genre, as most of you will be aware by now. I grew up with it, it's been part of my childhood, so I've always got that sort of nostalgic love for it, and I'm still to this day enjoying watching loads of old school slasher movies on platforms like Shudder and from the Arrow video series, etc. So this film, I really enjoyed it again. I mean, it's very, very different to the previous two, but I think that's okay because it's its own beast, and I completely enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. The scene that stood out to me the most was in near the beginning, where Lucas is going through this kitchen and there's blood everywhere, there's legs hanging out, a meat grinder, and there's lots of beheading as well going on, and it's just before he confronts his opponent, which is Meat Cleaver Max. So despite being completely different to House 1 and 2, it does share a lot of similar characteristics. So we've got the fact that it focuses on a family, which the other two films displayed, and most of the action is set in the house, specifically in the house basement, in this version where most of the bloodshed goes down. There is some stop motion animation in it also, not as heavily as there was in number 2, which was more of a creature feature. If I think it's taking influence from anywhere, it's definitely the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, in the same vein as Freddy Krueger torments his victims. Meat Cleaver Max does torment the victims with harassing phone calls. He's really menacing. And what I really did like about him in comparison to a lot of the slashers of that era is it's kind of refreshing that he is what you see is what you get. He's not a masked maniac stalking his victims in complete silence. He's just, one of those he knows what he wants, he knows what he's out to get. And I think that makes it even more entertaining on the whole. Also similar to Freddy Krueger, Meat Cleaver Max does throw out the puns there. He has some great one-liners, as I previously said, during the electrocution scene. He also says to Lucas in a threatening manner, "I will tear your world apart," which of course channels Hellraiser, so I think that was a really cool homage there, and I'm pretty sure that was intended by the filmmakers. The film contains the expected and familiar slasher tropes. For example, you've got the whole teen sex element in there that results in bloodthirsty consequences, and an unstoppable serial killer, much in the same vein as Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, all the icons. So it's very similar like that. It's going to take a lot to bring this killer down, and I think that's the fun part of the movie, is how is Lucas going to get past his fear of this man? How is he going to protect his family? And especially if there's this supernatural element going on here, how is he going to defeat something that's completely above him? I feel in a lot of ways the film is open to interpretation and is quite ambiguous to a certain point. I say this in the vein of it really does fit into the category of paranoid horror that was very prevalent during all the horror movies during the late 70s and the towards the end of the 80s, during Ronald Reagan's presidency and towards the end of the Cold War, where there was a lot of universal fears, and horror of course reflected this in its films. And I think in terms of House 3, I think you're never quite sure whether Lucas is going crazy, it's all in his mind, it's all sort of mounting up and manifesting due to his fears of this killer, fear of the trauma he experienced, and is he ever going to get over what he saw, and all the horror that he endured in bringing this killer down. So it's always quite ambiguous there. Is Max really messing with him, or is there something really deep, psychologically deep rooted with the main character, which I think is really interesting. So leading up to my overall thoughts, how does House 3, the horror show, compare with the previous 2 instalments? Well, as I stated, it's completely its own thing. It is a straight up slasher, and if you're a fan of that style and that genre, then you'll definitely be able to get a kick out of this one. I think it's completely underrated, and it's a really, really solid, fun film. It's got plenty of galore in it, and a really suspenseful plot. So you just want to see what happens next. But it's completely hammy in places, and it just is the embodiment of all that great stuff the 80s threw at us horror-wise, with the practical special effects once again. It's not as prevalent as it was in the second film, as I stated, but there's a great dinner scene where for some reason Meat Cleaver Max does emerge as part of the turkey. It's all really bizarre, and I think that's why I do love these films, because they are batshit bizarre, and you just can't go wrong there. It's pure fun horror entertainment. If I had to rank it with the other 2, it's difficult because I really love the first House film. It's a nostalgic favourite, but this again is really, really excellent, and I think because there's such different movies anyway, I think it's difficult to compare them. So whereas with something like Friday the 13th, everybody has their favourite. I think at the moment mine is part 4, but I always have had a controversial soft spot for part 5. But that's going a bit off topic there. But as you said, there's everyone has their kind of favourites and can compare, because they do follow the same formula. You know what you're going to get. You know that it's going to be Jason Voorhees, and essentially what's going to happen. But with these, I think it's kind of refreshing that Sean S. Cunningham took a risk, really, and decided to do something completely different for all of them, and that is really, really cool to see. Thank you so much for watching this video once again. I hope you enjoyed it, and that you stick with me for part 4, which is the 1992 film, The Repossession. I am really excited about watching that and concluding my experience with the House franchise. I'm also pretty sad that it's going to be over soon. There's only 4 films, and I have kind of got through them pretty quickly, but they're great, and I'm really grateful to Arrow Video for this box set, for releasing it, because it gives people a chance to discover these films if they haven't previously, and for long-time fans to be able to relive them. It's even people who may have seen them back in the day and maybe had forgotten about them and want to relive them, which is pretty awesome. So thank you so much for watching and taking this house journey with me. You can follow me on Facebook, which is Hayley's Horror Reviews. I'm at Welsh Demoness on Twitter, and at Miss Hayley R 1989 on Instagram. I will put all my social media links in the description box below, as well as link up the previous house reviews that I've done if you haven't seen those yet.